welcome everybody. It is 9:01. Welcome to the January edition or the July edition. Wow, we are not January. It is, I have a suntan. It's not January. The July edition of Lakeside Chats. I am not reverting back, I promise. We have the content for today is one that I'm glad that we had such a great turnout. I know we have at least 50 plus people registered for today's event, and it looks like we're having more and more people join as we hop in. But at the beginning is, so if we think back to January. In January, the first Lakeside Chat that I did was really a look forward to the year, and we looked forward to some of the potential regulatory changes that were coming down upon business, both in the big and small, and both in the Minnesota and beyond. And now we are at the midpoint of the year, and so I've decided, with all of the changes that are happening, both to us, for us, and around us, that this was a really good time for us to come back together and do a mid-year compliance check-in. And with that, I want to just introduce my two lovely co-hosts, Lauryn and Sarah. Lauryn, I love our story. I was telling it the other day that I went to an Eden Prairie Chamber tour event, and I knew that this was going to be my topic that I was working on for the next couple months. And, it's like the concept of kismet happens, right? I got a chance to listen to and hear from Lauryn as what I would say is a foremost expert on what's happening from workplace compliance. So Lauryn, do you want to just introduce yourself? I could geek about you for a couple minutes, but if you want to just introduce yourself so you're not embarrassed by what I say, let's start with that.
Hi, everyone. Lauryn Schothorst. I am the Director of Workplace Management and Workforce Development Policy at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, Lauryn. And then on the flip side to that, Sarah and I have known each other for a number of years now. I think we're at like 4-ish years, Sarah, that our paths crossed when I was on the broker side of the house. And now here at Lakeside, we continue to find ways for our worlds to collide. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Joag. I'm here in the cities as the Senior Partner Manager at Human Interest. I have worked hard for everyone to kind of know who we are, but if you haven't heard of us, we're a very tech-forward 401k and 403b platform, really with a focus that has historically not been available to small and mid-sized businesses. So I've been at the company for 4 years, the entire time knowing Erin, and just excited to be here and offer some thoughts on a lot of the changing legislation going on to keep in mind.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have both of you here. And I want to just, because I know we've got a number of people that are both, look at Sarah, you're already getting delightful shout out. Thank you, Sarah, for hopping on to chat, because that's essentially where we're headed. I want to just do some rules of engagement for those of you that are new and or those of you that have been on Lakeside Chats from the past, just as a revisit. One, as a reminder, these are public sessions. So the session, as you can tell right now, you should have gotten the notification that this is recorded. And so we will, once this event is complete, this recording will be loaded to the Lakeside Chat or the Lakeside website for your future viewing. So I will send a follow-up after today's session with the deck, with some notes and commentary, links to next Lakeside Chat, but also a link to where you might find the recording of today's session if you want to go back to, minute 14 when Lauryn dropped a huge, amazing bomb of information that you want to go back to. So just so you know that this is something that you can go back to. The access to the recording, like I said, will be referenced in addition to the follow-up. But similar to what Sarah Meserly just did, I want this to feel, and I refer to this all the time, as an underproduced session. Yes, we came prepared to talk about content, and yes, we have a PowerPoint deck prepared, but we are happy to go off script as needed, and we are happy to engage with you guys as much as possible. So we want to encourage the use of chat. We want to, every so often, I might ask one of you to turn your mics off and engage in the content, because we want to make sure that this is as much for you as anybody else, because this is content we think is important, but we want this to be what you guys want to hear, and we recognize that you are also providing your own level of best practices along the way, and we want to be able to lean into that as well. So use those use what we available through chat and through Teams as possible. We also want this to stay positive, and we want this to maintain some level of genuine curiosity. So ask questions, but stay positive along the way. we're leaning into that weird political territory with today's topic. So I want that to sort of, I'm leaning into that with the idea that this isn't a political conversation. This is facts and data points that we want to share with you, and recognize this. We're staying out of the politics of it all at the same time. We recognize too that in many times you might have a question and there might not be a right answer. There might be one, but there might not be, and that's going to just have to be okay. Because the goal of today's session is really to provide information and to create conversation. I think, Sarah, you mentioned it, right? Not everybody knows about what human interest is or even what you do, but we know that there's changes happening that may apply. Lauryn, not everyone may have met you before or even is aware of what's happening, all the things that are happening at the chamber. If you're not, you should. But there are lots of things happening that people like the Minnesota Chamber are doing on behalf of business, on behalf of HR, on behalf of business owners. And we want to just make sure that we're being an advocate to start that conversation. So kicking off with just a quick who we are and what we're hoping to accomplish today. But with that, for the 38 of us that are on today's call, click your little chat button at the top of the screen and open it up and tell me, when you hear the word compliance, what do you think or feel immediately? I feel like the word compliance creates this weird visceral reaction, both in terms of how people react to it, and I want to just get some people's commentary in terms of what they react to it. Thank you, Leilani, for being my first to react. And look at that, in the interest of all things positivity, an opportunity to partner differently. Sarah, Lauryn, I'm going to ask you the same question. When you hear the word compliance, what do you think of? What do you feel? Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah. I just kind of dropped it in the chat, but really just the need for proactive planning. When I hear compliance, I think I want to learn more. So I'm not caught on the wrong side of whatever compliance line is being drawn. And also, to Leilani's point, I'm going to lean into partners where, I only really focus on retirement legislation. Compliance is a whole umbrella. So that's where Lauryn and the chamber can, touch on a lot of points. I work with a lot of payroll folks. There's a lot that ties back to their solution. So there's the right players, but you might have to bring people together to make sure you're staying proactive in this world of compliance.
Lauryn, what do you think? What's your guttural reaction to the word compliance?
I have two. One is that I panic because the laws are so rapidly changing and the state doesn't have a really good mechanism for information sharing to businesses. And so there's a lot of folks that don't know things have changed and the consequences for non-compliance are significant. So the first is panic and making sure businesses know what's up and how to comply. And then the second is what I call competitive compliance, and really trying to help educate individuals as to what they're required to do, but then work with them to ensure they're able to develop business strategies around it and use it to their advantage at the end of the day. Yeah,
no, I think both are appropriate. I think I'll be honest. I think the word panic is probably is a real one, to recognize that we live in a space where when we hear compliance, it immediately you wonder, like, am I right? Like, am I? I hope I'm doing it right. Like, to me, that's the big piece of it. And thank you all for commentating here too. Rules on comfort, help, research. I mean, the words that we're hearing even in the chat from amongst the group here is completely what I would expect we would hear. So thank you all for participating. Lauryn, I want to lean into what you just said there about the education side of it and what the chamber is doing. So let's just start with a little bit about your role and what workplace management is and what you're doing right now and what are the things you're staying aware of. So do you mind if we start there?
Sure, that sounds good.
Awesome.
So as previously mentioned, I'm one of the policy directors at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. And just broadly speaking, our organization represents over 6,300 businesses across the state. So even split between Metro and Greater Minnesota, all industries are represented, businesses size, small business, large business. We're mostly small and mid-sized businesses, pretty heavy in the manufacturing space. So we represent, we're the largest statewide business organization. half of the year, the team that I'm on is at the Capitol, and we are lobbying on behalf of the business community. And then the other half of the year, we are bouncing around the state, meeting with business leaders to do education and awareness around policy issues impacting employers, the new laws, getting direct feedback on how implementation is going, what challenges businesses are facing in the state, and how business trends are looking. All of these things help inform our work at the Capitol. And as you can see on this slide on the right side, when will new policies impact your business? This was something we put out after the 2023 legislative year, which was an extremely anti-business, anti-employer year, something that we haven't seen in a number of decades. And there's about 35 new policies that directly impact employers, whether it's a new tax or a restriction on how you can do your operations, or, you can see the list there. So we put that out and spent the year, or the summer rather, informing businesses just about everything. Usually there's about one or two big consequential changes a year, and this was just something that we had never seen before. So when we started this year's legislative session, we were all wondering what it would bring for the business community. We did speculate that the legislature would visit some of those laws from last year. They were rushed through after a very, very intense session. So we thought there would need to be some technical fixes or scoping changes. Big bills that people like to talk about are the paid sick and safe time mandate, the paid family medical leave mandate, the legalization of recreational marijuana. But all three of those bills went through some revisions this session, and I'll get to those in a future slide. And we were hopeful that once the excitement over the legislative makeup, it was a trifecta: governor, Senate, and House control for the first time, and just a lot of pent up policy demands and things like that. Once that first session ended, we hoped that there might be some room for legislation that the employer community had been advocating for as it relates to some of those issues to the bills that had been passed. So once things got put into effect, there would be some scope issues, legislative overreach, cost concerns that we thought might be able to be modified. The other area that came into play is we were halftime of the biennium. So the legislative biennium is 2 years. The first year typically focuses on the budget. The second year typically focuses on bonding. And so we were just curious to see what the focus of the legislature would be. All of the leaders said it was going to be a light year, that they were just going to be working on implementation, deploying a lot of the resources. There was about $18 billion of surplus that was all used up. 10 billion extra dollars in taxes collected to fund a lot of programs. And so we thought that they might be really looking to deploy those resources and ensure everything was working. So perhaps it was going to be a light year. That said, we did know that there were a number of proposals in the labor space that would continue to go at the heart of the employer-employee relationship, put the state in the middle of those routine business operations, and continue to take a worker-focused agenda. And so, as you can see on that slide, from the chamber's perspective, we like to advocate against costly one-size-fits-all state mandates. And under that backdrop I just described, this particular year, we were looking for some breathing room for our members, making sure that if policymakers were considering additional regulations, that they do a more balanced approach using more of a least restrictive, non-redundant regulation possible. And just to put a finer point on this, the Chamber has a research arm through our foundation that analyzes the economy and pulls a ton of data on a lot of macro and microeconomic trends. One of the reports that we did this recently was on entrepreneurship, and it highlighted that the state's complex array of compliance regulations inhibit startup investments and job creation because Minnesota has a perception of being a high-risk state to hire employees. Another area where we put out research was on the business retention and expansion in our state. And we find that the state consistently ranks near the bottom of Midwest states for new and expansion projects. Things like Minnesota's high state tax rates and worker availability are cited as two barriers that prevent businesses from expanding in Minnesota. And then finally, we have a number of connections to site selectors, and a lot of our members are pursuing expansion projects too. And what we have heard from them is that our overall business climate and hiring issues have led to this trend of expansion outside of Minnesota in recent years. So from our perspective, unbalanced laws have consequences, and we're very concerned as to what might be happening over the next couple of years as a lot of these policies get firmly implemented and moving forward.
Yeah.
So this slide lets you know what happened last year.
I was going to say, Lauryn, I know you mentioned that this is something you guys put out. Is this something that people can, I'm asking because I know I had this slide, but is there a deck or is there a link or something that we can share as follow-up that they can get this piece or can, I'm subscribed to receive. If there's an opportunity to share that.
We have a website, mnchamber.com. There is a advocacy link that you can click on, and some of this information is on our blog and publicly available. Other things are through our member portal. So, shameless pitch to join the Chamber of Commerce if you want access to this information directly. We, in addition to this timeline for compliance that we put out, we did a number of webinars broadly, sort of what I'm doing now, an overview. We have experts from the Department of Labor and Industry and the Department of Human Rights. We have webinars with the Department of Employment and Economic Development to go over a lot of these policies from a regulatory compliance perspective. And then we sort of deconstruct these policies with our partner employment law partners and HR specialists and do on-demand webinars on some of these spotlight issues. So last year would have been the non-compete ban and the pay history question ban and things like that. So those are all opportunities for compliance that we do with our members through our portal. But some of this stuff is publicly facing.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, should we jump into that laundry list of changes that we've now maybe scared everyone a little bit about, but we'll talk about a little bit further. So I'm having these come in an order, so we can talk about each one and we'll play it out as we go. So first one that we've got on the list is the one that I think everyone is aware of, but it's the increase to minimum wage and particularly how this is going to impact for small business. Do you want to just speak to that just a little bit before we hop into the next one?
Sure. And if you want to put them all up, I won't go into too much detail on some of them. I'll get into detail on minimum wage and a brief explanation of some of them. So the question that we asked a lot of our members is, if the 2023 legislative session didn't happen, what would businesses think about the 2024 legislative session? So on this slide, you can kind of see from the workplace management perspective, these are the changes. There was about 10 or so new policies, and this is in addition to the 35 that we saw from last year. So I think this is significant, although after last year, didn't feel quite so much, but they're still consequential. So we want to make sure that businesses are aware. These maybe aren't so blockbuster, but a lot of these changes give the state regulatory agencies more power, more enforcement authorities. They put more details around employer obligations, incrementally expand employee rights and benefits, impose greater fines and penalty structures, and generally increase the compliance cost of doing business in Minnesota that adds up over time. So here are some of the business issues. And the one thing I'll point out is if you are a small business, a lot of this stuff will impact you even more so, because this session, the state continued the trend of rescinding longstanding small business exemptions. So when we're talking to small businesses, we don't need to worry about that. We're 15 and under, we're 50 and under, we're going to have an exemption, right? It doesn't apply to us. Our revenue is a certain thing. We have a certain employee count. That is not the case. Broadly speaking, if you are an employer in Minnesota and you have one employee or more, full-time, part-time, seasonal, you name it, you are going to be covered under the full scope of all of the labor laws in Minnesota, except for maybe one or two. And I can point that out. It's a bizarre two. I don't know why those two got the small business exemption maintained, but it's just a front of the line conversation we have. Make sure you're not resting on a previous exemption because it's likely been rescinded. So
I want to just pause on that real quick, because I do think that at Lakeside in particular, we focus a lot of our businesses that we support are in that, what I refer to as small becoming mid, or, people who sort of classify themselves as small, even if they don't really know what small means. And I think that that's part of what we're hearing, right? Is the language around what does small mean is changing and is evolving day over day. And so I think for the longest time, to your point, people could sort of raise their hand and be like, we're a small business, we're exempt. And what we're seeing is more of these rules, if I'm hearing you say that right, more of those rules are sort of removing that you don't get to plead innocent, the naivete, if you will, of a small business is starting to go away, and there's an expectation that you're paying attention, even more so than potentially you were before.
I think the best way to think about it is a lot of what the policies are focused on are the worker. So it doesn't matter to a worker if they work for a small business, if they are part-time, if their business has a certain amount of revenue, they should not be denied access to insert whatever policy because of where the employer is positioned. So, it's just shifting how you're focusing your understanding of this law. So these are laws primarily for workers. And so businesses need to make sure that they're working into that regime versus, it being employer having the flexibility to determine things that we would think employers typically should. The states, as I mentioned earlier, is interfering more and more in that dynamic and setting floors consistently.
All right, so let's go back to which were the ones that which ones get to still raise their hand and say they're small.
Right. Well, not too many. Just I think one on this slide, and then Sarah will be able to talk a little bit more about other small business exemptions. So at the legislature, we have a number of bills that move standalone, and then they get packaged into omnibus bills. So on this page, it's pretty much a labor policy omnibus bill. There was a labor finance bill that, if it has a cost associated with it, that's just sort of lay of the land issues, and they move differently throughout session. The labor policy omnibus included about 10, not everyone's listed here, 10 new laws. I'm not going to go deeply into all of them, but these include changes to the minimum wage, particularly for small businesses, a prohibition on restrictive employment covenants and service contracts. So the example that was used at the legislature, if you are a daycare provider and your parents you have a parent that is joining your daycare to put their children in there, and you have employees, there's a contract between the daycare provider and the parent that the parent will not poach, for lack of a better term, their teacher to be a nanny unless there's some sort of a fee. But generally speaking, it's like, you're not going to do this while you are a client of ours. That's a service contract, and that's a restrictive employment covenant. And that is something that has been banned. This was dubbed a shadow non-compete. And if you recall from last session, non-compete agreements were banned in Minnesota outright as well. So this was building on that effort. There were additional changes to pregnancy accommodation and leave laws. So last year, they rescinded the small business exemption, and all of state employers needed to follow the Minnesota unpaid pregnancy and parental leave law. This added additional provisions to that where, group insurance has to be maintained, and that prenatal appointments don't count against your 12 weeks of unpaid leave. This is an area of law that sort of mirrored FMLA. It has existed in Minnesota for a number of years. It had applied to employers with 21 or more employees. 2 years ago, it was lowered to 15 employees, and then last year it was lowered to 1. So now you have to make sure you're in compliance with unpaid leave laws, which will take, I'm not sure if it's going to be rescinded once we hit 2026 for the paid family medical leave law, but this was sort of a phasing exercise, and it's more related to job protections versus a wage replacement. And then there's a new requirement that employers disclose salary ranges and job postings. This is a policy that is part of the pay transparency trend we're seeing nationwide. Last year was part 1. This year was part 2. Curious, part of our conversation later is there going to be a part 3? Unsure. But broadly speaking, in an effort to close wage gaps and make wage and hiring decisions as transparent as possible upfront, starting in January of 2025, if you have 30 or more employees, every one of your job postings will have to include salary range. It can't be open-ended, and it has to include a brief description of benefits that would go into the compensation package. So
Right.
this
I
is
just want
that,
to make sure that that date gets restated, because that's, I don't want to get that lost in the salary range job postings piece, and then sort of the part 2 of pay transparency here in Minnesota goes into effect as of January of 2025. So part of the reason why I'm pausing there is because knowing my audience is in a position to say that that's one of those areas that, again, we want to make sure that the exemption doesn't apply. It applies for all roles. So we want to make sure we're thinking about and really getting ahead of what does that mean in terms of what changes you might need to make. Sorry, I didn't want to lose your flow, but I also didn't want that date to get lost in the mix there.
No problem. And that's actually important. And if you recall the timeline for compliance that we put out last year, we did that because it was very difficult to know what was happening and when. You have some policies at the state that go into effect immediately upon enactment. So the sick and safe time changes, for the most part, for example, that we'll get to in the next slide, they went into effect immediately, but some go into effect on July 1st, which is the fiscal year start. Some go into effect on August 1st, which is the policy year start. Some go into effect at a date that the legislature determines. So we had a number of provisions go into effect in October, or will go into effect in October's. And then January 1st tends to be another big year. Starting a calendar year is when new laws go into effect. So we try to, you wouldn't believe how much political capital is used on the effective date issue alone at the Capitol. We really think that a long lead time is important. Like I mentioned, the state doesn't have a good mechanism for informing employers. Some of these decisions have costs. They need, businesses need at least a quarter or two to plan ahead if there's going to be costs after budgets are set. And then systems need to be updated too, especially in HR. And just the lack of understanding that these policies should have lead times. I know they want to have workers enjoy benefits as soon as possible, and that's the reason behind the push for faster implementation. But there's a whole story that we really need help. And if you're talking to legislators, you might be opposed to the policy, they might be committed to the policy. At the very least, we're looking for longer lead time so that we can have these types of conversations. And a lot of times they don't draft the language really well, and so people are trying to understand what specifically is meant by this, and regulatory interpretation of how easy it is to implement something is just not always accurate.
Totally. Thank you.
So
sorry,
you wanted me to talk a little bit about minimum wage?
Well, okay, so I'm just looking at the list, and I want to just make sure that, again, the slide's going to be provided. We'll make sure we get you the links to the chamber links too, so you guys have this as follow-up. I'd like to sort of move forward, if that's okay with you, and then we can answer more questions and again, I throw this out to the participants too. So if you've got questions on any one of these, feel free to keep posing your questions along the way. But I want to get kind of the next slide. We're talking about some of those fixes that we've got that have come through, because I think especially as we talk about sick and safe, and I think the recognition of what's to come with paid family medical leave, those seem to be the sort of hot button issues. And so let's jump over to those two topics. And then again, if those of you on the call have additional questions, please post them into chat and we'll make sure we get those questions covered as well. But Lauryn, let's take a quick stab at those fixes that you've referred to a couple of times here in terms of what came out of last policy and now what we're expecting is coming forward. And we know that this is still has some there's still some ellipses at the end of some of these sentences still. So let's start there.
That's correct. And fixes is in quotation marks because they're not really fixes. In fact, they made the bills a lot worse for the employer community for the most part, but there were some technical fixes that were helpful. And so that's broadly what we found. And we are now trying to do this game where it's like, okay, here's what the law was. We're still having questions about compliance with the law as it was, even though it went into effect January 1st. I can't tell you how many businesses don't know it's the law of the land. And so they're struggling to come into compliance at all for the first time. And then the session happened and there were some significant changes that some that we had advocated for on the before it became enacted. So thank you for doing it now. It's a little too late, but if you're not in compliance, it'll make it easier for new businesses or things like that. Others expand the scope of the mandate. And so you're going to have to go back and potentially rethink what you've already put into place. So, maybe one step forward, two step backs. This made changes to things like the base rate of pay, record keeping. Those are some areas, increment of time. So think about, your payroll system might calculate time on a minute by minute basis, but per the original law, you had to allow individuals to take time off in the smallest increment of time that you were keeping payroll. That does not make any sense to have someone take a minute or two. So they've limited it to 15-minute increments of time and then 4 hours at the max, just to give a little bit more planning consistency and reason. Base rate of pay was clarified. There was a lot of questions about if you had multiple hourly rates, if you were paid piecemeal, things on a commission. So they made clarifications as to what that base rate of pay is. And this is guidance that the Department of Labor and Industry has now put out. So there's a bulletin that's gone out, and individuals can read directly from the agency what changes they made and why. We're still in the process of working with our employment law folks to deconstruct some of that in a more meaningful way for business perspective. The mandate changed for scope. So if bereavement leave is now included. Previously it was not. So it's a requirement that if someone requests time off to go to a funeral or deal with financial implications from the death of an individual, those are now, you cannot deny them. Those are now part of the mandate. So those are changes that went into effect immediately. The biggest change is really consequential. It doesn't go into effect until January 1st, 2025, but this is an area where, again, curious to get feedback from the folks on the call today because you're directly involved. A lot of discussion went into how are you going to construct your PTO banks? Were you going to have a sick and safe time bank? Were you going to have a PTO bank that was broad? Would you have a separate vacation bank? How would you structure it? Or are folks going to be front loading hours? Are they going to be doing unlimited PTO? A lot of these strategic questions were debated leading up to the implementation of sick and safe time. A lot of the conversation was if you have a more generous policy, you should be in compliance. It's not going to impact everything. And then this session, one of the changes they made was to strike the word no effect from no to effect on more generous policies. So no effect on more generous policies now says effect on more generous policies. And this means if you have a PTO policy in excess of the required sick and safe time hours, which are, annually up to 48, and then the carryover of up to 80 hours. So broadly, if you have a policy in excess of 48 or 80 hours, and those hours can be used for someone's personal injury or illness, then your entire PTO bank is now governed by the sick and safe time mandate. So you must follow requirements about notice, documentation, anti-retaliation, replacement workers, and more for those hours in excess of the mandate. And that is just a wildly huge change that's going to have serious implications. Businesses are now struggling to understand.
I feel like that could be like the end of the sentence.
Yeah, I have 200 hours in this bank. So now I can't require somebody to provide me notice because that would be deemed non-compliant with the notice requirements. I can't, make somebody find a replacement worker for a shift they're going to use if they're using, their 100th hour. That's anti-retaliatory. So, it's going to really be interesting to see how businesses comply with that and make strategic decisions. Are they going to just give people PTO and then vacation and not allow you to, toggle between a lot of people like that flexibility for their workers. They have some reasonable notice requirements for using that time. That's putting into question how people respond to that. So that is the most significant change in the sick and safe time bill.
I like that. I wanted, as we move into the next one, and I want to just sort of again, use the chat feature as an option too, but respond to Lauren's question. One, were you aware? And two, how are you feeling about the updated policy? Did you feel like you which direction did you go to a sick and safe policy? Did you go to a PTO? I'm curious to her level of curiosity. I'd like to hear from a couple of you, if you guys didn't just mind in terms of what changes did you make as a result of the most recent sick and safe piece of it? But with that, Lauren, do you want to move into I think the one that, I mean, we're getting calls from large employers that are even going like, we don't know how to stay up to date with what's happening with paid family medical leave. How do we make sure that we're thinking about the financial ramifications of how it's going to impact our business as well? How are you answering that question in terms of how, knowing the policy, kind of should employers be thinking about preparation for the updated, what is it, PFML? Am I saying it right?
Yep. So broadly speaking, they've rebranded it as just paid leave. So, the agencies are going to just call it paid leave, which the way that the program is structured, there's a family leave component and a medical leave component. Family leave includes caregiving, bonding, military exigencies, that type of caring for another. And then medical leave is your own illness or injury. Those are two separate programs, each 12-week program, but in a benefit year, an individual, if they access both, would be capped at 20 weeks. So it's a 12 and a 12, but combined 20. If you had, for example, a car accident or a cancer treatment that took your medical leave for 12 weeks, and then you had a baby that same year, you would have, there's a formula, it's like number of hours used or number of weeks used minus 8, or something like that. And you get to 20 as your max. So you'd only have 8 extra weeks for the bonding if you had a child. So the way that this is set up, it goes into effect on January 1st, 2026, which is pretty much just around the corner. The state is in the process of developing a lot of their policies and protocols. The session and enabled a number of changes, technical, not like sick and safe time where it's perhaps meaningful right now because the system isn't live yet, but these will be helpful changes in the future. But there was also concern about, from our perspective, scope of the mandate and then cost attributed. Essentially it's a new insurance product that the state is running, a partial wage replacement. The state is in the process of standing a new 400-person agency in order to run this. It's going to be similar to UI. Employers will collect a payroll tax for their employees and themselves. It can be split, so there will be a strategic decision you'll need to make if you cover your employees' payroll tax share or not. And then employers will remit that to the state, and then the employees will apply to the state for this benefit. So it's removed the role of the employer to a certain extent. We're concerned about the timeliness between notice between the state and the applicant and the employer, making sure that it's as quick as possible so you're not having any of these gaps. But that's what the program is going to be. And the first day that you can apply is January 1st, 2026. Now, in between now and then, they've just concluded their rulemaking feedback loops. By October of this year, there's going to be expedited rules issued, and this impacts things from benefit processes, overpayments, appeals, what a seasonal worker is, what a definition of a remote worker is. A lot of things will be crystallized for next year. There is an obligation for employers this year. You'll have to submit a wage detail report in October. But then looking to 2025, the biggest thing that businesses are going to have to decide is if they want to participate in the state program or if they want to pursue a private plan to substitute that. And that's going to be the bulk of the information that comes out later this year, the decisions that you'll have to cost out and then pursue in 2025, because you'll need to lock that in 2025, which is, tomorrow for benefits purposes. So that's what we're hearing a big interest in our members, big and small, how they can opt out of this thing and manage their benefits directly for their workforce and not have the state being intermediary. That's going to be the top priority for a lot of businesses, I think.
Yeah, it's not surprising that it's been on the kind of the tip of everyone's tongue, knowing that it's coming forward and figuring out how to both get ahead of it in terms of policy, but also get ahead of it in terms of management. And so I think that that's a fair statement there. Thank you.
And just one other thing, when you have collective bargaining agreements, there's a question in the chat, we expect that one of those terms is going to be covering the full cost of that payroll tax. And that's going to then, I think, put a lot of pressure on other employers in the state to cover the full cost of those payroll tax. Right now, the law is permissive, so you can do that. And in other states, the payroll tax is usually on the employee because it's their benefit. It's portable, right? So the employers have to sort of work around it. Those other states have gone down the route of doing more of a percentage on the employee and less on the employer for the payroll tax. Minnesota split it evenly and allowed employers to cover more of that tax. And I suspect that's going to be a competitiveness issue that a lot of businesses feel forced to cover the full cost.
Do you want to get a drink of coffee or something, I'm like, you've said a lot, and I feel like to the point, I think there's a lot of things that I'm not trying to boil an ocean here, but I do think that there's a piece of it that like we are the event today is an option of awareness and recognition that we are not here to solve the issue. We are here to tell you what's happening. But the conversation can continue, right? Whether it's calling Lakeside, whether it's calling your peers, getting connected to the member, to the chamber, to making sure that you're staying ahead of it, to making sure that you understand how your size business, implication of business is being impacted, and making sure that you're thinking ahead of it is really what we want to, what we're hoping to get to here. So thank you, Lauren. I wanted to move forward just because I know we're not done. If that's scary enough to share, as we aren't in a position where we're not even done talking about some of these changes. But to get you guys better, to kind of re-engage the group here, I wanted to just do a couple quick fact checks to see if you guys are aware. And so the next topic we're going to talk about is why Sarah's here is really to talk about this change that's happening in terms of what's happening from the investment side of it. And so we want to talk a little bit. We didn't really talk about what happens on the flip side, but I want to just sort of get everyone thinking about it with regards to how much changes is happening. So knowing that non-compliance often results in fines or lawsuits, what percentage of increase do you think we've seen over the past 20 years in terms of how many more employment fines and lawsuits have happened? Do you think it's under 25, 25 to 50? 50 to 100 or over 100% increase, and one or two comments is great. What do you think? A, B, C, D? Where do you guys think we're at in terms of percentage of increase? Terry says C. Got a couple C's. So we got a lot of C's. I'm not trying to scare everybody, but let's be honest, I'm going to scare everybody. The answer is D, and actually the answer is 400%. We are 400%, there's a 400% increase over the last 20 years of what we've seen with regards to non-compliance results in fines and lawsuits. And so these fines are, the reason why we want to make sure that we're making sure thank you, Stephanie. That's exactly how we all feel. But with that being said, I just wanted to call out that this is part of the reason why the concept of education is so important and why I wanted to make sure we're bringing us all together. All right. Next fact check. What percentage, and Sarah, you say this one because I think I'm going to say it wrong because I think I might have put the slide together wrong here. So Sarah, you read the fact and then we'll answer it.
Yeah, so we're actually speaking of 50 companies with 50 employees or less. For that segment, what percent of employees don't have access to a pension or retirement plan?
Okay, so the classification of 50 or less, so small business through the lens of us old benefits people, what percentage of employees don't have access to a pension or retirement plan? D, C, B, no B's yet. All right, so the answer is, Sarah?
And the answer is D. So you guys are spot on. When you go to that 50 to 99 employee mark, it's still, a quarter are not, those employees just don't have accessibility to the plan. And even companies with 100 to 500 employees, there still is about 15% not offering something today. So, it's definitely something that impacts small businesses more, but it's not, some of what I'll share today is really impacting a lot of businesses all around.
Yeah. And so why are we talking about this? So why is this important? Because for many of us, as much as many of us are paying attention to the PFML, or now what are we calling it now, Lauren? Just paid leave. Secure 2.0 came out last year as well in terms of another rule that's going to impact many size employers as well. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the impact that Secure 2.0 is going to have outstanding as well. And so Sarah, we'll jump right into your slides because I want to talk about this concept of state mandated retirement as kind of bullet point 1. So you want to take it away?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll take it away. And, just to kind of transition us from Lauryn and I just met through Erin putting this together. I have over the years been involved in the chamber in some semblance, whether it is the Minnesota Chamber or some of the local chambers. But as you can see, like I will say from a retirement standpoint, you guys were like one of the few that actually was talking about Minnesota Secure Choice. I've actually seen partners of mine with printouts of that one pager. So I know we've kind of been celebrating you guys, but like really making sense of all of this, like what I'm going to share today, there's a huge asterisk between it's like, what did you say, Erin? I think when we chatted, like a choose your adventure, because we all start, but the way you interpret this for your business, and I would say chambers and like, the folks like Lakeside, they actually have context beyond just your business. Just like in the chat, people asking, what's the gut check of other Minnesota businesses in my situation? What are they doing? Like, that's how you guys are going to find the right thing for you in conversation. And so, I would love longer lead times as well with some of this. But I think what I'll connect the dots on too, as far as some of this retirement legislation, is Lauryn mentioned it briefly, but competitive compliance. I would really think about that theme, because if you're not doing some of this, what is that impact to when employees are educated on these offerings? How is that trickle down effect impacting you? And let's be honest, some of these one size fits all approaches, they're going to have real implications to you as a business. And so if you can have a trusted advisor to kind of figure out what's going to be that main priority for you guys in the short term, long term, like, it is overwhelming. So in my world, there's two pieces, and actually this state mandated retirement piece is separate from what we just mentioned was the Secure Act. So we'll touch on that in a little bit. The thing that I just wanted to come on and talk about, and Lauryn and Erin, I meet with advisors, and I know Cullen, I can see he's on here from Sageview. He's an awesome local advisor here in the cities that I work with. But so many CPAs, advisors, they're not aware that this is even rolling out, or they may have heard it, but they can't really give good guidance. And so I just wanted to pause and just let everyone know that, across this country, there's actually 10 states with active mandates. We've got Colorado, California, Washington, our neighbor Illinois. If you have 5 employees based in Illinois and you're not offering a plan, you might be headquartered in Minnesota, you need to be compliant. And then you've got, this map of states rolling out past legislation, which is what Minnesota did last year. That's going to be going into effect, slated for next year. So why I mention this though, is that this yellow, employers may be subject to penalties, like that is a real thing. In Illinois right now, if you have not been compliant for the last, couple of years, it's actually $250 per employee for the first year of non-compliance. And then for the second year, it jumps up to $500. We took on a new client earlier in last year in Illinois, and then they showed us a bill for $18,000 from the Department of Revenue for Illinois, and that was a look back of non-compliance from 2021 and 2022. Like they didn't become our client until 2023, so we could stop the bleeding, but they still were on the hook. So I would say it's never too late to just talk to an advisor, anyone, myself, just to make sure you guys are staying ahead of this.
Yeah.
And Erin, if you want to just jump, for the sake of time, I'll just touch on, is the Minnesota slide after this one? Sorry.
Yep, it's after this one. Do you want,
okay, if you could just jump to that one quick. Okay. So for Minnesota.
Underproduced, I say it every time. I'm happy to flip it back and forth. This is exactly.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, we're chill. So it's called Minnesota Secure Choice. It was passed last May. And like I said, as Lauren mentioned, longer lead times because some of this is still yet to be defined. What we do know is if you have 5 employees or more and you have been in business for at least 2 years, you're going to be required to offer a qualified retirement plan. Some definitions of eligible employees are still a little bit in the gray, but again, we've seen a handbook of 10 states already roll this out. And so we anticipate, having a good handle on it. A couple things to note, Minnesota is setting up an IRA program through the state. And so more definition around what that program looks like. You also can get compliant through a provider like a human interest, where, taking advantage of like the 401k versus like an IRA product. There's differences I'm happy to kind of go into the weeds on just as it relates to really using this as that competitive compliance angle. So I would say I'm meeting with companies all the time who, of course, everyone wants to hire more, but there's a lot of people that are just really worried about losing a couple key employees. And I know I can go on LinkedIn and, there's a lot of companies that want to have conversations, and I'm sure a lot of us, there's golden carrots being dangled everywhere for us. And so how do you as the employer kind of control some of that with some of these programs in place to kind of incentivize that retention? And there's differences, within each of those breakouts. Compliance has not been defined, like I said, but I think we will have that news by the end of 2024. So like Lauren said, some of this honestly just goes effective overnight. And so we wanted to just come on. Erin and I were chatting a couple months ago and I was giving her the headlines of this and she's like, people need to know about this. So I'm grateful. This is just, the tip of the iceberg to just, if you're not offering a plan today and you're sitting here, let's chat. Erin, if you want to go back to the next slide though, Secure Act 2.0. So we've got these mandates, but there are some cool programs the federal government has put in place. This was actually originally passed in 2019, but Secure Act 2.0, December 22 was expanded. It was 91 provisions, so not going to go in the weeds on all of those, but headlines here would be really the maximum amount of benefits is for businesses with 50 employees or less. There's also a sliding scale of accessibility to some of these if you have 50 to 99 employees. Headlines would be, if you have never offered a plan before, the government is basically giving you a tax credit back for the next 3 years to cover those costs. So a cost of administration that human interest charges, you can work with your CPA partner and us to get that back in the form of a tax credit at the end of the year. Now, if employers are offering matches, they also get an additional tax credit. So we know matches incentivize participation, incentivize retention. It's all a trickle-down effect, maximizing the design of the benefit. One thing to highlight is if you have a simple IRA and you wanted to take a look at the advantages of a 401k for your business, you've always had to kind of wait till the beginning of the year. You couldn't contribute to 2 different types of plans in the year. And part of Secure Act this year is, this is the first year you can actually make a mid-year conversion to a safe harbor 401k. So really great news, all in the effort of, Secure means setting every community up for retirement enhancement. So, that's kind of the goal here globally. I think Lauren set the stage really well. A lot of this it's starting with a need for the workforce, but the trickle, if we work backwards, sometimes the detail, the fine print and all of that isn't actually panning out in practice. And so some of it's been a revolving door, but
yep.
There will be also, if you're starting a plan next year going forward, auto enroll and auto escalation.
Yep.
So will
think
pause there. And
yeah.
yeah.
No, I want to say, so I think again, if we go back to sort of this collective piece of it, I think to what you're saying here is a lot of the rules that are coming out on both sides of the equation here are, and Lauren, I'm going to try to paraphrase what you said, is employee centric, right? It's with the idea that you should like your job, you should stay with your employer. It shouldn't matter if they're a 2-person organization or a 2,000-person organization or a 200-person organization. You should be in a position to be able to get benefits. And so there's an element that you can understand and sort of like see some of the rah-rah behind it. But the reason why we wanted to bring people together on the flip side to it is there's preparation necessary. There is financial impacts. I mean, and Sarah, even to your point, right? To go without a plan to moving to a plan, there's a cost just to administer having a 401k. And so that's one more expectation that the employer needs to figure out how they're going to build that into their larger budget. There's, to Lauren's point, there's this piece to be able to say, if now they don't have the flexibility, or they're not required to give us this flexibility to tell us when they're taking time off, how do we make sure that we are staffed accordingly when we are a 2 or 3-person organization? And so we need to be thinking about it through the lens of finance. We need to think about it through the lens of efficiencies, staff capacity planning, and also employee centric, and making sure that we're creating a work environment that is a place where employees want to work. And so there is pros, cons, and everything in between with regards to the rules and the regulatories that are coming out. And so with that, I want to just do one last chat with you guys while we've got just a last couple minutes with the group. Is the idea of, so as you're hearing all of this, are there ones that you think are going to have the biggest impact to your employer's bottom line? Do you think minimum wage is going to affect you the most? Do you think the idea of adding a 401k or adding a retirement option is going to affect you? Do you think, the mandate, paid family medical leave or paid leave is going to be impacted? I want to just throw it out to the group here to just say, which of the policies that we've talked about today, or maybe ones that you think in general that you've been made aware of, are going to have the highest impact to your bottom line? All right, so we're seeing paid leave, we're seeing paid leave, we're seeing paid leave. I think that's fair. And I think that because there's a tax component, I think it's also from an organizational structure component, knowing that there is this expanded piece of it. I think that is a fair statement. Final words, you guys, before I do a quick pitch for next month. Thank you both. This is, I feel like there's a degree that I'm kind of glad, to be honest, Sarah, thank you for making me restructure those slides, because I like the good news, bad news sandwich. And I think that there's been a lot, it's one of those ones where we want to make sure that we're staying informative, and hopefully the education is the part that is where people are walking away with. But it's scary, and some of the numbers are scary to be aware of, and some of the things that if organizations aren't talking about it now can be scary as well. And thank you all for the participants for being on. A quick follow-up for everybody here. I'm going to send, as I said already, the recording, the links, the comments will all get sent to you in a follow-up. I'll also be sending you a link to a survey. We are also at our own mid-year check here at Lakeside, in terms of making sure that we're continuing to put out good content that you guys are engaged in and want to be a part of. So let us know what you want to hear more of and who you want to hear back, or topics you think we need to dive deeper in, or topics we haven't talked about yet. We want to make sure that we're getting that back to you as well. Thank you, Lauren, for putting that chat out there as well. So fill out the survey, because that'll be a link it'll be one of the many links I'll send to you in the follow-up session today. And then the last thing that I'm going to say is just a quick, they are continuing. Lakeside Chat is going to continue into August. On Tuesday next month, on the 20th at 9 a.m. So same bat time, same bat channel for August. We're going to do an event. We're going to get away from compliance for a month and go back to a conversation that I think is also really important, and it's the conversation around leadership, and the concept that when you're in a degree of leadership, it can be pretty lonely in a degree, and we want to make sure we're thinking about what are the ways and strategizing together as a group around how we can both support our leaders to give them a place of that they can then have that place so they don't feel as lonely in the decision making that they are, and externally giving kind of what are some of the ways that leaders have been able to manage through that loneliness as well. So it's a different conversation, but excited to have you guys back in August. Sarah, Lauren, any last words from you before we close out?
No, thanks for having me. Happy to be a resource. And it's never too late to start chatting about this and figuring out how it's going to impact you on a more granular level.
Awesome. Thank you. Lauren, how about you?
I put my closing remarks in the chat. So thank you for having me. And please holler if you have any other questions. Come join me at the chamber. We will be doing an in-person competitive compliance conference in end of October on a lot of these topics. One of the areas we've heard from businesses is they want to talk to other businesses while they're receiving this information to do that benchmarking or get some strategy ideas. And so that's going to be one of the functions of that conference. So stay tuned. Non-members are able to join as well as members.
Awesome. I think that's awesome that you guys are doing that too, because I think what you said there is exactly it. We can tell you from the pulpit all day long, but I think that conversation of business to business in terms of we're doing this, have you thought about this, or this affects us this way? I think that grassroots conversations need to happen as well. So thank you guys for putting that on, and thank you all for being here. We'll see you all in August. Have a great rest of your day. Let's hope the sunshine finds us here in Minnesota today at some point. Awesome. Have a great one, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.